Hello. I have read over 75 books in the past year, and today I'm going to be talking about Steve Jobs' biography. So I read this a few months ago, and honestly, it was my introduction to biography slash autobiography. And number one, I wanted to read this because Steve Jobs created Apple, probably one of the best companies in the world, most known companies, biggest companies, etc. So there's a lot to be taken from someone who's done something that massive. He also has a very interesting story in how he worked. He was very about simplicity and also making sure that every detail, even inside of the computers and the phones, he wanted to make sure that the stuff people couldn't see were the right color, the right setup, it looked right. He was almost psychotic about the quality of the product. So basically in this video, I'm just going to talk about a few things I picked up from the book itself, and perhaps it'll give you a better idea as if you should read it or not. So it obviously opens up talking about his childhood. So he had very supportive parents, and he always kind of way. He grew up and he wanted to go to the most expensive college in the country, Reed College. And he basically made it such that his parents did it. They paid for it. He went, whatever. What I found really interesting about Steve's childhood was that he actually was really Zen Buddhism. And at the age of 19, he went to India for 7 months or so. And he did a lot of LSD when he was young, which he attributes a lot of his... He says that he can't really connect with people who have not done LSD. They don't understand him. He also says it was one of the most important experiences in his life because it showed him the importance of making a truly great product and really making art as opposed to making money. So what's interesting about that is a lot of entrepreneurs think, okay, make and probably thinking more numbers than the actual product itself. But what you learn throughout reading this about Steve is it was always about the product, and it was also always about simplicity. There's a quote I think he put on one of the Apple launches which said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Now I will say this book is almost, I think it's like 600, so it's definitely one of the longest books I've ever read, which is partly why I wanted to read it. But I will say it was captivating all the way through. There was never a point in which I was, no. There were certainly points where I thought, I want to get to the next chapter. But it was so many ups and downs of his journey. It was also really interesting seeing his love life. A guy like this, you think, how does this guy interact and have relationships? Well, he wasn't very good at it. He had multiple wives and multiple girlfriends, mistresses, etc. And he actually had a kid who he more or less didn't really see. And he did name one of the computers after her. I don't know. But he wasn't very good with relationships. He also was the reality distortion field. So if they had a deadline coming up and it was completely out of grasp for the employees to even consider completing, he'd be like, no, we're still going to do it. No, this is going to happen. And a lot of the people who worked with him talked about how he would just distort reality to make what he wanted happen. He also was very emotional. So he'd blow up at people all the time. And he was ruthless. The one thing I really did like, and I've taken just small things from his story that I want to implement, but he also never really liked meetings. He didn't like long PowerPoints. He thought if there is a meeting, you should be able to say it just verbally, no PowerPoints. He thought those were stupid. He also really liked walking meetings. So if he had to have a hard conversation, look, there's a picture in the book. Here's him and John Shuley, and he's trying to convince Shuley to become the CEO, I believe. And he has a quote. They're sitting on a park bench, and he goes, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want a chance to change the world? So he was a very salesman, and he had a way of rusing people or cajoling people. And it tiptoes the line of manipulation, but at the end of the day, he created such a revolutionary company. One thing about Steve is that his house, obviously he was massively wealthy, but he never really had anything in his house, and it was just a part of his personality. He was such a perfectionist that Even the furniture he bought was a life decision. Even if it was what type of screws they were going to put in the computer, it was a whole thing. He was so meticulous about every single detail that even if it was a lamp, it had to be the most perfect lamp, maybe an extravagant lamp, etc. The shirts were these black shirts. They were actually specially made for him in Japan. And he just bought a bunch of them and just wore them all the time because he knew that's what he liked, and he didn't want to have to keep looking for clothes that he liked. So at the end of the day, I think all of Walter Isaacson's biographies are absolutely incredible and very well written. And I think if you want to just conquer a book that is massive, has a great story, and the cool thing about the book is that if you're entrepreneurial, if you read Steve Jobs' biography, you're going to have a bunch of stories to pull from. And obviously, stories are massively important in the way you persuade. And so, if you have stories from the most massive company and one of the greatest entrepreneurs ever, you can bring up these stories and conversations to help kind of make. So, for instance, Wozniak and Steve were making one of their very first products, and Steve wanted to make I think it was one of the first computers, but Steve wanted to make it almost next to nothing. He wanted to make it barely and just profitable. Steve was the one who came in and said, no, this thing is going to be expensive. And so obviously Apple products are not cheap. And that's one of the lessons I took, was that you need to price things almost so high that it seems unreasonable, because that only increases the value of your product itself, the perceived value at least. It also attracts better customers, not problematic customers who are just looking for something commoditized and cheap. So there's just so many great lessons and stories you can pull from. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, it's probably a must read. I think it might make you want to do LSD, so be careful about that. Just set your expectations. He talks a lot about LSD in the beginning, so be careful with that. I'm not saying that you should do drugs, and I don't do drugs, but Steve did, so maybe you do want to do them. I don't know. But anyways, this is a review. Thumbnail here. Thumbnail, baby. Woo! This is a review. Excuse me, voice crack. This is a review of Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. My name's Liam. I read a lot of books, talk about business, talk about fitness and jiu-jitsu and everything, so if you want to subscribe to me, just do it, bro. I'm awesome. I'm going to be famous here really soon. Peace.